Hello, Night Shift Nightmares family. I'm Dr. Robert Geller. Today, I'm going to tell you 3 horrifying true horror stories from the dark heart of hospitals that will keep you up at night. Have you ever wondered if, in the darkest hours of the night, on that thin line between life and death, the walls might have secrets whispered to you? The whispers coming from the empty rooms of the pediatric clinic, that moving hand in the icy coldness of the morgue, or that shadow that suddenly appears in the operating room. Are these just the tricks of insomnia or an ancient curse hidden in the depths of the hospital? Now take a deep breath. Get ready, because tonight you will witness how an ordinary vigil turns into a chilling nightmare. Story 1. Whispers from the Children's Clinic. 3 o'clock is the most ominous hour of the night. It is the darkest moment of the night, when neither the energy of the day remains nor the refreshing light of morning approaches. That night, at exactly 3 a.m., it was my turn to be on duty at the pediatric clinic. During the day, this section, with its colorful walls illuminated by light, shelves filled with toys, and the joyful laughter of children, seemed to transform into another world at night. The echoing footsteps in the corridors blended with the intermittent hum of fluorescent lights, creating an uneasy feeling I couldn't quite place. As was done every night, the patients had to be checked. I put my phone in the left pocket of my scrubs, took the blue folder containing the instructions, and stepped into the corridor. I began checking the patients' rooms one by one. One of the doors in the middle of the corridor was slightly ajar. When I turned my gaze toward it, I heard a faint humming sound coming from the crack in the door. It was as if someone was speaking in a low voice. I stopped. I held my breath. I felt a slight sweat on my forehead. I blocked out all other sounds and focused my ears solely on the room. The door slowly opened inward. There was no one inside. Only an old stuffed bear, its seam torn, lay abandoned at the edge of the bed. The stitching had come undone, and cotton was poking out. And yes, the whispers continued. It was as if a child, hiding under the blanket, was speaking from there. "Come here." At first, I thought it was just my fatigue playing tricks on me, since I had eaten little and worked hard that day. Nights are long, and the mind is fragile. But this was different. The sounds were growing clearer, making my eardrums tremble. The faint whisper of a little girl echoed in my ears. "Why did you leave me, doctor?" The tone of the voice carried such pain that a chill spread through me. Without even looking back, I hurried to the nurse's station. Sarah, a friend from my old hospital, was there, taking a sip of her coffee. I quickly explained what had happened and what I had heard, my voice trembling. She narrowed her eyes and looked at me with a slight mocking expression. "Dr. Geller, that place has been empty for months," she said. Months. I didn't know whether to be surprised by Sarah's response or by the event I had experienced there and had quickly moved on from. I was speechless. But no matter what, Sarah's words sent a chill down my spine. Was the room really empty? Had I imagined it? But no, I had heard that sound. I was certain. I had seen the bear standing there. It was as real as both of us could deny. That night, I checked every corner of the pediatric clinic multiple times. I stood in front of every door and listened inside, but there were no whispers anymore, only silence. And I still felt the weight of the toy bear's gaze on me, as if its cold eyes held a frozen scream. The next night, I was on duty at the same hour. The moment I stepped into the clinic, a weight settled on my chest. It felt as though a concrete slab had fallen on my chest. My spirit felt constricted. It was as if someone was trying to pull me back. I could feel that I shouldn't be there. I didn't want to experience the same things again. As I passed by that room again, I paused. This time, the door was completely closed. but a moan coming from inside gradually turned into a lullaby. Sleep and grow. My hair stood on end. This couldn't be real, but I could hear it. Desperately and curiously, I opened the door with trembling hands. The room was empty again. I had fallen into a meaningless void mixed with fear. When I looked at the bed, there was a small difference. The teddy bear was under the blanket this time. Someone had put it there. But how had its position changed? I approached without looking away. The moment I touched the bear, a scream escaped from inside me. I think I was about to have a panic attack. My heartbeat quickened, but I couldn't change anything now. The teddy bear was cold, but it felt wet. Its eyes looked like they were about to pop out again. I didn't know if it was brown or if it looked black because of the darkness in the room, but the torn cotton was still the same as before. When I looked closer, I noticed that it seemed like someone had hugged it just a moment ago. When I put it back in its place and turned around, a whisper came. "Why did you leave me alone, doctor?" I turned around with a sudden reflex. There was no one there, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. The toy bear's eyes were no longer plastic. They seemed to sparkle with life. At that moment, meeting its gaze was unbearable for me. With a fear that made me feel like I was going crazy, I left the room. In subsequent shifts, I always slowed down as I passed by that same room. I listened intently. Sometimes I heard that lullaby again. Sometimes there was only silence. But each time, the spirit of that lonely child seeped into my heart. That lonely child had only one friend, and that was the toy bear. Was it watching me from another dimension, communicating with me through that bear? Weeks later, the teddy bear disappeared. The cleaners said it was thrown away. But I didn't believe them. Maybe it had left the hospital, but now it was with me in my dreams. I couldn't get rid of that toy. I knew where it was when I was in the hospital, but now the only place I know it is in my dreams. That bear wasn't just a toy. It was a symbol of abandonment. And still, every time I pass that room, a void echoes inside me. Sometimes it's a whisper, sometimes it's a lullaby, but always like the waiting of a child lost in the past, like someone preparing my end. Story 2. The Shadow in the Morgue. Morgue. This word alone is enough to change the atmosphere. It creates a sense of dread in people. It is a place where time stands still, surrounded by walls as cold as ice, silent, woven with death, echoing with stories that have been lived. That night, around 1:45 a.m., I had gone down to the morgue in response to a call from the forensic team. It was a case called in for an autopsy. I had the file in my hand, my mind filled with hundreds of thoughts, but there was a tension inside me that I couldn't explain. As I approached the rusty door of the morgue from the corridor, each step felt as heavy as grave soil. When I entered, white body bags placed on ice-colored metal shelves waited silently. The only sound in the room was the flickering of a fluorescent light that had lost some of its brightness. Even the mask on my face had fogged up. My breath was short, my heartbeat irregular. I had begun to sweat coldly. The chill of the environment seemed to dance across my body. I approached the autopsy table. I read the name written on the file, male, unidentified, found dead. I slowly leaned toward the table. Then, from the far corner of the room, came a muffled click, click sound. I gently raised my head and said to myself, there shouldn't be anyone there. This was a place of silence, and the presence of another body was out of place. I checked the morgue door. It was locked. I had passed in front of the cameras. I was sure I was alone. What if I wasn't alone in this silence? There was nothing else I could do. The tapping came again, louder this time. I walked toward the corner where the stretcher was. There was a body covered with a sheet. It was impossible not to hear the sound coming from under that sheet now. It was like the sound of someone scratching a gravestone with their fingernails on metal. I gripped the scalpel in my hand more tightly. My palms were probably hurting a lot, but I wasn't in a state to notice at that moment. I would understand everything after it had all happened. Two voices clashed inside me. One said, "Don't go near it." The other said, "You have to look." My curiosity was overpowered by my identity as a doctor. If there was someone alive whom we thought was dead, I couldn't leave them there. I approached the blue stretcher with slow steps. With each step I took, the clattering sounds echoing on the metal grew faster. I reached the edge of the sheet. I paused for a moment. I took a deep breath, gathered myself in the few seconds that passed, and lifted the sheet in one breath. What I saw was not a normal body. No, this shouldn't be. I had always thought about the possibility of encountering such a situation before. The time had come. There, lying like a shriveled piece of dried skin, was a hand. The skin had turned gray and the fingertips were pitch black. But the most terrifying thing, the hand was trembling with small reflexes. No, this couldn't be. My eyes widened in shock. The hand was slowly moving its fingers, as if it wanted to touch me. I needed to determine whether it was alive or not, but I couldn't. I couldn't even touch it. I took a step back, my foot slipped, and the scalpel in my hand fell to the ground. The sound echoing off the metal floor was like a scream splitting the morgue's silence in two. It was so loud it drowned out my heartbeat. Just then, the morgue door creaked open. With a cold breeze, a shadow slipped in from the dim corridor. I remember being so scared that I lost my mind. I just stood there, motionless and helpless. At first, I couldn't see its silhouette. But when it took a few steps forward, I realized that its presence was not human. It was a boundless darkness. It had no beginning and no end. The ceiling lights began to flicker. The hand on the stretcher rose into the air at that moment. I rubbed my eyes. The hand was waving at me. My hair stood on end. A short time later, I thought that I would probably join the silent spirits reaching out for the metal parts. I staggered backward. My knees felt like they had given way. The shadow approached me. The coldness was no longer just in the air, but inside me. I felt an icy pressure in my chest, as if my heart were about to stop. The shadow bent down, like a dark void approaching my face. And then, that voice echoing in my ear, "You're here, finally." It was the raspy voice of an old man. It sounded like it was coming from beneath the earth, not from his lungs, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I simply closed my eyes, accepted what was happening, and watched the events unfold. At that very moment, a voice came from outside. It was Walter, the security guard. "Dr. Geller, there are sounds coming from inside." The shadow vanished instantly. The ceiling lights returned to normal. The hand on the stretcher fell lifelessly to the ground. When Walter entered, he found me on the floor. I was kneeling, my eyes darkening. It wasn't that my eyes were darkening. I had almost forgotten the light. "Is everything okay, doctor?" I barely managed to lift my head. "Yes. It was a long night." I didn't tell Walter what had happened that night. Who would believe me? A moving hand, a speaking shadow. They'd think I was a mad doctor. Maybe they'd expel me from the profession. I couldn't do anything about it. But I knew, that night, I hadn't just encountered a corpse. I'd faced the echoes of the past resonating through this hospital. The morgue. It was no longer just a place of death for me, but also a realm of waiting spirits. And every time I passed through that door, my ears still sought that voice. "You're here." No matter how hard I tried to stop it, people had begun to think that Dr. Robert Geller that is, me, was crazy. It continued that way for a while. If you had experienced something like this, what path would you choose to prove what you saw to others? Could you really achieve that? Story 3. The ghost nurse in the operating room. The operating room. For most people, it's a cold, scary place. But for me, it was the bridge between life and death, just like a pilot's cockpit, familiar, controlled, and safe. The monitor with green and blue lines at the end of the patient's bed, the supply cabinet directly behind me. It was also a place where I raced against time, silently battling for hours on end. Everything was sterile, orderly, and procedure compliant. But that night, I experienced something no rule or protocol could explain. It was 4:30 a.m. I was in the operating room for an emergency appendectomy. My team was ready, the patient was under anesthesia, and the operation had begun. I had just made the first incision when the lights on the ceiling suddenly began to flicker. Within a few seconds, they went out completely. At that moment, an abnormal silence fell over the room. No sound from the monitors, no hum from the air filters. Only our own breathing remained. The generator should have kicked in, but it didn't. My colleagues looked at each other nervously. The hands of the assistant standing next to me were shaking. The assistant standing across from me had her eyes wide open in fear. This isn't normal, I thought to myself. Things weren't going as I wanted them to. My hands and feet felt tangled up. In the darkness, a whisper rose from the other end of the operating room. It sounded like a woman's voice, but faint, almost like a whisper. "Dr. Geller," she said, followed by another sentence. "Help me, please." As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I turned toward the direction of the voice. Who was asking me for help? There, behind the anesthesia machine, was a silhouette. It looked like a nurse, but I didn't recognize her. Her uniform was old, from the 70s, it seemed. A white coat, a traditional nurse's cap on her head. Her face was pale, her eyes empty, but she was looking at me, directly at me. Then something happened. All the monitors suddenly started beeping loudly. The devices were beeping one after another, and everything started speeding up. The green and blue lines grew longer, and the numbers changed rapidly. Her heart rate rose, her blood pressure dropped. The team panicked. We're entering a point of no return, I thought. But my eyes were still on that nurse in the darkness. It was as if she was the cause of the signal interference. She was holding an old surgical instrument in her hand. "Save me," she said again. But this time her voice was darker, like a lament. At that moment, it didn't even cross my mind to ask how I could do it. I was so shocked by what was happening and didn't know what to do that I couldn't help her. With the team's situation added to this, everything was mixed up. The scalpel was in my hand, but I was holding it not like a surgeon, but like someone trying to defend themselves out of fear. That silhouette was slowly approaching. With each step, the air in the operating room grew colder, as if the walls themselves were trying to escape from this presence. My team was frozen. None of them were speaking. They were just staring at me with their eyes. No one knew what to do. When the nurse stood directly in front of me, our eyes met. In her eyes, there was darkness, an endless, bottomless void. We were now in a situation where we all felt we were between life and death, not just the patient lying on the table. At that moment, the door burst open. Walter entered, holding a flashlight. "Dr. Geller, the entire system has crashed. I came to check on it." At that moment, the nurse disappeared. It was as if her presence had evaporated with the light. She dispersed like mist before my eyes. The lights slowly returned. The monitors returned to normal, and the patient stabilized. My team gathered themselves as if waking from a deep sleep. Everyone was silent. But their eyes told me, "You saw it too, didn't you?" This time, the fact that I was the only one who experienced what had happened was both a miraculous event and an irreversible path for me. Now, some people believed me, while others thought I might be losing my mind. I was no longer alone. That was the only good part for me. We completed the surgery. Everything returned to normal. But I couldn't return. Those eyes, that whisper, that cry for help that could be heard even in the silence. I can't get them out of my mind. Days later, I researched the hospital records. I learned that years ago, a nurse had suffered a heart attack during her night shift in the same operating room. She had died right there in that room. Maybe she was still waiting for help. Hospitals aren't just places that heal. Sometimes they're places that hold. Some souls can't leave the hospital alive. Others don't want to leave at all. Every time I enter that operating room, my eyes dart around the corners. Will that nurse come back? Will she keep asking for help? Or this time, will she leave it to me to help her? Now there were others in the hospital who knew something was off. But the worst part was that everything was getting stranger and stranger.